having heard the Christmas story for over half a century, and having preached on the Christmas story for over 30 years, I still am discovering new things. 2 months ago, as I was planning for worship services coming up in Advent and Christmas into January, I thought, on Epiphany, I'll recycle that idea I had a few years ago. It's a solid idea, solid sermon idea. It's got 3 points to it, as you can probably guess from the sermon title. And I'll just use that. The problem was my third point was a little scripturally weak. And I felt really good discovering something new this past week that I think strengthens my third point. So the way Matthew tells the story, by the time he has the Magi showing up in Bethlehem, Jesus might have been walking. The actual birth of Jesus takes place in chapter 1 in Matthew's Gospel. Mary and Joseph are engaged. Mary gets pregnant. Thanks to a dream, Joseph doesn't cut off the engagement, but Mary is the pregnant Mary. She gives birth. Joseph names the child Jesus. It's all wrapped up by the 25th verse of chapter 1. The Magi show up sometime later. Much later, how much later we don't know, but based on the story that gets told after the story of the Magi in Matthew's Gospel, it may have been as many as 2 years. What caused the delay? Well, their journey, I suppose. My first point is implied by action of the Magi, or is based on implied action of the Magi. In order to have observed the star at its rising, they had to be observing the stars. And that's my first point. Be on the lookout. Be observant for signs of God at work in the world. If you're not watching, you're going to miss the signs. Seek a star. And I don't mean you have to literally take up stargazing. You might. You might enjoy astronomy. You might see signs through that. Get some sense of what God is up to through astronomy. But you don't have to do literal stargazing to seek this metaphoric star I'm talking about. I'm saying be on the lookout for signs. The second thing the Magi do is they respond to the sign that they saw. They saw a star that made them think that a new king of the Jews was born or was about to be born. That's cool. They could have stayed in their home country and celebrated there. They could have advised the political leaders of their country, hey, out there in the east where they're from, there's going to be a shift in the politics in Judea. I'm thinking maybe, because of this star. They don't do those things. They journey across what we call the Mideast to come to pay homage to this newborn king. They follow their star. Even though Israel was an occupied country and King Herod the Great was a puppet of Rome, they saw a star that led them to believe that a new king was born, and they decided to follow up on it. How they went about following up on it does suggest that they had no sense of realpolitik. There's no way Herod the Great was vacating the throne unless he died or unless Rome said, bye-bye. The Magi might have thought this new king was born, but realpolitik would say that king wasn't going to be sitting on any throne anytime soon unless the Romans made it happen. Realpolitik would advise, don't bother going to pay this supposed new king homage. My second point, once you see the sign of what God is doing, respond to it. Don't let a concern for conventional wisdom or realpolitik slow you down. When God is at work, a faithful response is called for. Do it. Seeking the star is step one. Following the star is step two. Now, I like to imagine that once the Magi returned home, the story continues. Call it fan fiction if you want. I don't know how much fan fiction gets written about the Bible, but you can call this fan fiction. I imagine the Magi returning to their homes and telling others about the wonders that they found when they crossed the deserts. I imagine them being stars in their own community. I don't mean being famous. I mean being stars in the sense of being a sign in the heavens, being a sign in the street, being a sign around the dining room table, being a sign for others to see that God is at work. And that's my third point. Be a star. Let God use you to let others know what God is up to. The discovery I made this week is that you don't need the fan fiction for that third point. As I studied and prayed with today's gospel lesson, I had two insights, really. The first one isn't all that important, but I'll share it anyway. First one was why I like Luke's birth narrative better than Matthew's. I'd rather be a shepherd than a magus. Magus? However it's pronounced. I'm pretty cool with the shepherds. You know, they get that angelic announcement comes to them. They go celebrate. On the other hand, the Magi get a star, and they're wise enough to interpret its meaning. It's not the reason I prefer Luke. It's something else. It's been something about the shepherds. Consider their social status. They have no power, no prestige, no education. And I tend to cheer for the underdog, so maybe that's why I prefer Luke's story. The Magi, on the other hand, have power, prestige, and education, yet for all their power, prestige, and education, the Magi come off just as naive as the shepherds. They see the star, they interpret it to mean a new king of the Jews is born. They go to Jerusalem, which I suppose makes sense. A new king would be born in the capital, wouldn't he? Except they don't go there to find the child. They go there to get directions. They go there to ask where they should go to find the child. What do they think Herod is going to do with them, or that question, or that news? How naive can they be? I excuse the shepherd's naivete. Heck, I embrace the shepherd's naivete. The angel comes and tells me, behold, I bring you glad tidings of great joy, for unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign to you. You shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes and laying in a manger. Dudes, let's check this out, seems an appropriate response. The Magi, they just don't seem all that wise to me. That is, until I had my second insight, the important insight. Maybe they are not as naive as they first appeared to me to be. Maybe they knew exactly what they were doing. Maybe these Eastern intellectuals purposely are poking the bear. Biblical scholar John J. Pilch suggests that these strangers from the East represent long-standing resistance to Western, which at that time meant Roman, long-standing resistance to Western imperialism. The way Matthew knits the story together, these strangers, these wise men, have come a long way to pay homage to Jesus, the new king of the Judeans, not to pay homage to the current king, but this new king. They go to the current king for directions, and that makes the current king afraid. They are poking not just Herod in the eye, they are poking the whole Roman Empire and all all of Rome's puppets. The reason they embody, the vision they embody, reaches far beyond Israel to embrace the entire known world of ancient times. Now, I suppose Matthew's original audience would have seen these wise men, these strangers, these magi as very high-ranking political religious advisors to rulers from some nations in the area which today would be Iran or Iraq. Back then, maybe Matthew's original audience would have thought of that land and thought immediately of the exile, the Babylonian exile. Perhaps. Richard Swanson muses that if they had been historical figures, perhaps they would have been influenced by the Jews who remained in Babylon after the exile, tutoring these magi, these wise men, in sensing the goodness of God, training them to raise their eyes to the horizons for God's activity in the world. Perhaps that's how Matthew's original audience thought of them. The story is very good at evoking images in our minds, good at evoking fan fiction from me. I suppose it did for Matthew's original audience as well. Potentates coming to the seat and symbol of power in Jerusalem, and with a simple question, terrifying the ruler. When they finally come to Jesus, they find an economically limited toddler in modest surroundings lying in a teen mother's arms, as Shelby Copeland describes it. And they lay before the toddler and his mother their gifts, gifts fit for a king, gifts that evoke our reading from Isaiah 60. The story ends with them leaving for home, but having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left their own country by another road. Illegal activity, right there at the start of Matthew's Gospel. Herod had ordered them to come back to Jerusalem to tell them, when they find the child, where Herod can go to find him. And they don't do it. They go home by a different road. Civil disobedience. Poking the powers that be right in the eye. That is core, as Liz said, to this story. So here's my third point, reworked a little bit. When we follow the star, when we daringly follow the star, even if it means facing down the principalities and powers of our day, we become stars for others. I can't hear the story without thinking of all the political leaders of our day who are paranoid about losing power and who are willing to do almost anything to hang on to it. I can't hear this story without thinking of the well-intentioned people who are being manipulated by individuals and corporations and governments via social media and countless other ways to view the world distortedly. And now I can't hear this story without also seeing those who have become wise to the machinations of others and who stand firm in their resistance. These too are stars declaring God's miraculous, wondrous work. These too are stars you and I are called to follow, and in following, perhaps we too might become stars for others. This day gets called Three Kings Day. We think this day is a story of three kings. It's a story of two kings. One is called Great, and one is called Emmanuel. It's a story of two kings. One who rules with violence and paranoia, and one who rules with peace